You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 on Instagram and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold, episode 33. Today we welcome in a very special guest. I'm very excited to have Dr. Alan Rubenstein with us. How are you today, sir?
I'm fine.
Good. Nice to have you. And you're of counsel at the law firm of Gottlieb, Rackman and Reisman. Is that correct?
That's right. I was a partner there for about 30 years and then retired about 3 years ago and took a position as of counsel.
Okay, so can you just explain briefly like what of counsel means?
I have a contractual relationship with the firm where I do work for them, and they can refer other matters to me.
Okay.
So we work together on various things.
Okay. So if there's something that they want you to handle, they'll send it to you.
Actually, there's one large client that I introduced to the firm years ago.
Gotcha.
And they keep me busy with work, and I do that work from home.
That's great.
It's opinion work dealing with cell phone technology. There are these patent pools where various cell phone companies all contribute their technology into the pool so they don't have patent disputes with each other.
Okay.
But in order to do that legitimately, they need an opinion from an attorney saying that this belongs in the pool. The pool has criteria.
Okay.
So I do that work, and there's a lot of it.
Well, that's great. So it keeps you busy. So let's go back like to before being an attorney, like your history a little bit. So tell us where you're from.
All right. So I grew up in New York City.
Amazing. Okay.
In the Bronx.
That's great.
In a working class community, and I got a public education all the way through college. So City College was free at that time, and
right.
By free I mean $12 a term or something like that.
Which is still a lot, a little, sort of, right? Not really.
I have all the bursars receipts framed in my apartment.
You do. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. So then I went to MIT.
Yep.
From City College, where I was for 5 years, and I got a PhD in elementary particle physics. And after that, from childhood, I mean, I was really in love with physics. I was the kid who read all the books in the library.
Really? Of the physics books?
Without shelves.
So were the physics books like the ones that you were reading, and they were probably like the very clean and very crisp, and like the pages were stuck together because nobody else was reading them, right?
I'll tell you, there are a lot of people who are interested in science.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting.
I had one problem with reading all these books was when I would go to the library was near the barber shop, and I would go to the library, take out a book, and then go to the barber and read the book in the barber shop, and then return the book to the library. So the librarians didn't like that because they used microfilm to record who had the book, and it took overnight to produce the microfilm for them. So they had no way to accept the book. That was one problem. The other problem was there was hair in the book. So I had these constant battles with the librarian who liked me, it was sort of cute that way.
Wait. Oh, there was hair in the book?
I went to the barber, I was reading them.
Oh,
I was getting my hair cut. So,
that's funny. Yeah.
But anyway, so I was very lucky. When I came out of high school, the Russians had sent up Sputnik the year before, and President Kennedy, I guess it was, had decided that he was going to win the Cold War by making scientists. All the money that now goes into wars in the Mideast was put into creating scientists and supporting more universities and so on. So by the time I graduated college, the opportunities were enormous in the sciences. Everybody went to school for free.
Yeah.
Go to graduate school, nobody was paying if you were in the sciences.
Okay.
So that was my experience.
What was the most popular subject back then to study?
Well, physics was the top of the list.
Really?
There were lots of. It was the largest department at City College, for example.
Oh, it's City College. Okay.
But a lot of kids had trouble with it. You know, it's a difficult subject.
It is.
And they would drop out into things like medical school or chemistry or something like that. So we who were left in physics were quite arrogant about that.
Jeez, you say drop out into medical school like it's they dropped out into
they couldn't do the physics, so they applied to medical school.
Right.
Just the way.
So
and school was free. Even medical school was affordable by most people at that time.
Right.
It was just a golden age for this stuff. So I went to MIT to do mathematical physics. That's what I was really like. I picked the subjects that had the most complex math in them, because that was how I thought progress was made, by applying new mathematical techniques to physics. And the physics was a good way to keep me from wasting my time on unimportant areas of mathematics. In other words, I didn't want to end up playing chess.
Right.
I wanted to do things that had some relationship with practicality.
Well, so if you stop right there, so I don't know if you probably do know this, maybe you don't. We featured you on the Lawyer Stories platform on Instagram today and on Facebook. So we have your lawyer story up there. And one of the quotes that I pulled from your lawyer story, which you just sort of touched on, was the real reason I went to law school was the impracticality of particle physics and my experience with the practicality of the legal system.
Yeah. So what happened was, after I finished at MIT, I got a postdoc at Stanford University.
Yep.
And now physics was impractical, but that wasn't a drawback. I mean, I was directing myself towards a field that had no immediate practical applications. But for Benjamin Franklin, electricity didn't have any practical applications. I mean, that's how science goes. So anyway, I met a lawyer out in California, and I had a problem with a landlord. And I went to this lawyer friend, and he said, well, you're at Stanford. You have access to their law library. Why don't you look up the law? I'll show you how to do it. And I was just amazed that, all these problems that had nothing to do with physics could be approached from the point of view of the law. And it was really interesting to me that this friend of mine basically knew everything I didn't know. I mean, how you deal with a landlord, what my rights are.
Okay.
So that began the transition. I did research to show you how impractical my work was. I wrote a paper on something called the electromagnetic form factor of the N-star resonance.
Okay.
The N-star resonance was a particle. Well, people really weren't sure it was a particle because it only had a lifetime of 1,000th of a billionth of a second. You created it and it disappeared. And the only place it existed in nature was in the interior of certain dense stars, perhaps. So that's how far away I was from practical things. So then from Stanford, I applied for positions at universities in the United States.
Okay.
And essentially, the positions that were available to me were at good schools in the Midwest. And I wasn't ready to do that.
Right.
I had been at New York, at Cambridge, Massachusetts, at Stanford, California, and the Midwest was like a shock to me.
Right.
People were nice, the job was good, but I wasn't sure that I had ever thought about doing that. And it was sort of like being thrust upon me.
Right.
So I took a fellowship for 2 years to go to Israel, to the Weizmann Institute, which is an
Weizmann
excellent
Institute,
place in physics. And while I was there, I decided I was going to change fields. If I went into another field of physics, it would have taken me 3 years to, let's say, if I decided to be a solid state physicist. And I looked into law school, it was also 3 years, and it was school. I always loved school.
Right.
So my wife and I just had a baby, and she was willing to let me do this, to go back to school.
Yep.
So I did, and I went to Boston University.
Yep. So you went back to Massachusetts. All right.
Yeah. So I went back to where I had lived.
What were you were in Israel as a fellowship and doing?
That's right, doing elementary particle physics.
Wow. I've been to Israel once, just so you know.
Yeah, so I lived there for 2 years
Okay.
doing this. My wife was she was the same as me. She went through various scholarship programs.
Wow. Okay.
And she was a doctoral student at she's a biologist. It was some agricultural institute in Israel. But anyway, so we left there and came back to the United States, and I started law school at that point. And I just assumed it was school I was going to do well. I mean, like I say, we were and confident. I was there a short time, and I realized this is very different than anything I had experienced before.
Okay.
It was going to require a real effort to do well at it, and I was prepared to expend the effort. But the first thing I noticed was that people didn't understand me when I spoke. I was used to talking. I mean, in ordinary life, you talk to people all the time.
Yeah.
As far as expressing myself in a class context, I gave the kinds of succinct responses that would be appropriate to speaking to an expert in a physics.
Like, is there an example? Like, I'd love to hear what that sounds.
Yeah, well, I remember there was a complicated question. I raised my hand. The professor called on me, and I stood up and I said, "Estoppel," and I sat down.
Okay.
And that to me solved the problem. There was
Right, because you gave them a legal principle, but you didn't give them the analysis, right?
Right.
Okay.
And I mean, one of the things I learned in the course of this was, if you get up in court, you got to tell the judge who you are, why you're there, what you want.
Right.
Before you get into the nuts and bolts of things. And I had to learn to do that. And also, physics was, the way you learned physics was not by intensive reading. You learned physics at the research level by talking to people, So to be, one of the surprises for me when I went into patent law was how document heavy it was, that people, you were writing these patents explaining technology to people. But my experience had been, in a conversation of 2 sentences, you usually found out what was at the core of the subject. So there was an adjustment.
Wow. Yeah.
And while I was in Boston University, I got a job teaching math as an adjunct professor. So I was a student and I was a professor at the same time, which was sort of unusual.
Okay.
It let me approach the faculty, even in the law school, to suggest things that I thought were wrong with the way the education went compared to the other. The big bugaboo was this idea of having one exam at the end of the year and nothing before that. And that made no sense to me, because the benefit of taking exams is you know whether you're really getting the material or not. And also, what's expected of you.
Right. So
I tried to explain that to the faculty. They didn't try it. But since I was teaching math, I said, let me try that. let me try this one course. I'll give only a final exam, no other exams. And that was a disaster. I mean, it was exactly what I expected happened. A lot of the students had no idea where, what the material was covering. And after they got their grades, a lot of them came in to complain about what a terrible exam it was, how unfair it was, how they know they deserved a higher grade. So I never did that again.
Okay.
It just created all kinds of problems.
Wow.
So, as I said, my wife and I had a child. By this time, the kid is like 3 years old, and I need jobs.
Right.
I got to support myself. So I did very well in the first year of law school. Got onto the law review.
Okay.
And the professor, my favorite course was real property law, and the professor who taught that course offered me a job.
Wow.
Working with him over the summer. That was the end of my first year. And
Okay.
we worked on a book on zoning in New England, I remember. He did Connecticut and Massachusetts, and I did the rest of New England. And then, so that was fine. Then at the end of my second year, again, I needed a job, but now I was interviewing for, as a second year law school student, you can get a job at one of the big firms.
Right. So what was that?
These interviews were coveted, and I had no trouble getting them. I had a very interesting resume, and people wanted to meet me.
Yeah.
So I had lots of interviews, but no offers.
Okay.
And finally,
Why no offers? What's that all about?
well, that was my question.
Yeah.
So I asked one guy. I said, "Look, I need a job. I've got a kid. I need a job. Forget about your firm. I don't think you're going to hire me. But tell me, why am I not getting job offers?" And he said, "You do not have the resume of a lawyer. You have the resume of a scientist." And that's strange, and it's just not what people are looking for. He said, "Why don't you go down to New York to one of the big patent law firms, and they'll hire you in a minute."
Okay.
And
Wow.
I did, and they did.
I like that. You were really upfront, and you asked the guy a question. You said, "Forget about your law firm. Tell me,
Yeah,
how can I get in somewhere?" Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of strange interviews. I won't go into that, but this guy seemed like a nice fellow.
That's nice. Okay.
I even was interviewed by Paul Dukakis, who ended up running for president of the United States. And
Right.
I remember he started the interview by saying, "I didn't do well in physics. What else have you got?"
And you were like, "Well."
He was a human being also. That
Yeah.
was okay.
Right.
So I go down to New York. I get a job at Kenyon and Kenyon, which is one of the biggest
Right.
patent law firms at the time. And I don't
So
know
what
if
was that? So did you have an interview there? Do you remember like what that experience was like at Kenyon and Kenyon? Like what? Because the guy before you that you talked to said they'll see your resume and they'll just be like they'll hire you right away. So like was that sort of the experience with Kenyon?
Well, what it is they send the interview is supervised by one partner, and he takes you around to a bunch of other partners.
Yeah.
Right? You see 4 or 5 partners, and he says something to the other partner like, "Gee whiz, this guy is really perfect for us." Things
Okay.
like that. So that went well, and so I come down there to work for the summer. I'm not sure I want to be doing this, and they had gotten some work from Texas Instruments.
Okay.
Okay. And they had an inventor's notebook, and nobody could figure out what it was all about. It had something to do with magnetic bubble memories. And there was all this handwritten stuff about black lines. So they said to me, "Look this over. Do you know what black lines are?" And I said, "That's not black lines. Those are Bloch lines, named after Felix Bloch." And they said, "Who's Felix Bloch?" And I said, "Felix Bloch got the Nobel Prize in Physics for nuclear magnetic resonance, which is MRI today."
Wow. Okay.
So they said, "You're going to Texas." So I figured maybe I should be doing this,
Yeah.
And I learned in that summer that I really liked the work that was there. A lot of it was dealing with scientists and engineers, I understood those people, I was very comfortable. And I'd rather do that than be working on bond indentures or
Right.
financial statements and so
Right.
on. So I took a full-time job with them and did mostly litigation for 7 years. I was
Okay.
at that firm, and then at the they were not making partners for the whole period. But in my 7th year, they did, and they did not make me a partner. So I said I'm leaving, and I went to I did having been at a large law firm. I didn't want to repeat that
Right.
at another large law firm. So I went to Gottlieb, Brackman and Reisman, where I thought I could really develop a stronger practice. And at that time, they were 5 partners.
Okay.
So it was a much smaller law firm.
So you grow it? So you grew with the firm. Like, how was your practice affected? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, very much that way. And they had a lot of very interesting work. I mean, there was some major litigations and they wanted me because I had handled large litigations when I was at Kenyon and Kenyon.
So what was it like being at a firm, being at that firm, and then litigating against larger firms? And like, do you have any what was that experience?
Yeah, the small firm, large firm thing, I think is overemphasized in this sense. When I was at Kenyon, unless you had one of these mega cases, which involved damages of, say, $100 million, it's Kodak against Polaroid, it was Xerox against us. Unless you had one of these giant cases, 3 people staffed the case. There would be one partner who interfaced with the client. There would be one partner who ran the litigation, and there would be an associate who basically did the ordinary work in the case. And that was it. And so whether the firm was large or the firm was small, you had this, as far as the client was concerned, you had 3 people helping you out. And certainly Gottlieb, Brackman and Reisman had no problem manning firms like that.
Okay.
And the other thing was, when I got to court against these large firms, you have to realize what you have in court. You have a judge, and the judge has at most 2 clerks, usually 1 clerk, and that's it. And so you can't have 12 people talking to her. So typically when you get to court, 1 lawyer stands up from each side and talks. It doesn't matter how many people you have sitting behind the bar.
Right.
So you never had to face more than 1 lawyer at a time anyway. So it never mattered to me what the size of the opposing firm was.
So what was it like when the larger firms got into the intellectual property cases that you were sort of already doing at a different scale?
Well, what happened, there were several cases where I was hired by large firms that had matters to handle and did not have a patent department. So I was hired by Paul Weiss to run the patent side of it. I was hired by Weill Gottschall to run these cases. And I think they learned from me how profitable it was. And then they started taking in patent clients. Now, what kept the large patent firms alive was referrals from the large general practice firms that didn't practice patent law. They represented,
right.
I don't know, they represented the Googles of the world, but not in the patent area. So they usually affiliated with a patent firm. But now they were going to keep the work for themselves. So that was real competition and so they started absorbing the smaller firms, and many offers were made to us to join into these larger firms, and we basically rejected those offers because we liked the autonomy of the practice we had.
Right.
The offers looked sweet for 1 or 2 people, but there was a whole firm that we represented.
Right.
And it looked like for a couple of years, you would be treated well, and then your clients would diffuse into the matters that you were used to handling would now be handled by different groups in that firm. And it was, I myself didn't look forward to working for firms with large administrations, even if they're efficient. I think it diminishes the role of the individual lawyer. So that was a decision we made, not to be absorbed by these large firms. So
Okay.
we litigated against them successfully, and the only detriment to being at a small firm is you don't get these mega cases. You don't
Right.
represent Apple.
Right.
Yeah, we represented Google on smaller matters, but one of the things is that the people who refer out these cases, they have to worry about how it looks if they lose the case. And they want to be able to say, well, we went to Cravath, Swaine and Moore and they lost it.
Right.
So we didn't do anything wrong. We went to the top of the heap. And so it's difficult to get these large firms to bring their work, to be impressed by somebody and bring the work to a smaller
But
firm.
you like the structure and like the firm that you're at. You obviously have been there for many years, and like you preferred that to like the large firm and the bureaucracy that was there, and how that the cases would have been trickled down. And
the major partner at the firm was George Gottlieb, who's still practicing, and he is, one of the two best managers that I've ever seen as far as managing people. And
okay.
And there's an air of fairness in terms of compensation and how you treated at the firm that just flowed out from him, and also Mike Rackman was an important partner. And Mike's attitude was people should be paid really what they're worth and not, and then Jim Reisman was a partner there, and his attitude was, each person has some area in which they're very good, and if you have to confine them to that area, but treat the people well. And one of the things that really impressed me was there was a very large lawsuit that we had, and as a result of that, I don't even know if I was a partner yet, because I was there for 2 years before I became a partner. But the firm made a lot of money that year, multiples of what they had made in previous years.
Yep.
And they paid me accordingly. But I noticed that when I became a partner, when I could see these records, that they paid me more than they had ever earned.
Okay.
Previous years. They didn't pay me more than they were earning that year. I mean, there was still a big differential, but they were willing to pay me more than they had ever earned before. They didn't say, well, we'll confine his income. And I knew of no other, because I had friends, who had gone to other firms. I knew of no other firm that treated people that well.
Okay.
So, and I was happy. I was allowed to do work my way, and at the large firms, there's a long incubation period, which is very frustrating to most people, before they let you do things. At Gottlieb, Rackman, Reisman, people are given responsibilities at a much higher level immediately.
Yeah, that's good.
You would have meetings with opposing counsel where things were actually supposed to be accomplished.
Right.
You're supposed to resolve disputes and not just perpetuate them through things.
So one question I'm really curious about, or want to answer rather, is like new technology. I mean, obviously technology and like physics, and like how do you keep up with like the new technology that comes up, and like you must have seen some amazing transformations, like over, the course of your career, things that like cell phones and just like, I mean, even, I was in college when like I got my first cell phone, you know what I'm saying? So you just must have seen some really interesting developments and like you being kind of on the front lines with like the patents and the IP.
Yeah,
Just
well,
curious.
that's what I loved about the practice was you would go from one area of technology to another. It wasn't just cell phones. I mean, when I finished my PhD, people didn't have computers.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
One of the early jobs I had was working for NASA, and at that time there were 4 computers in the United States.
Wow.
Mainframes, and they were all owned essentially by NASA. I think there were 2 in Florida. There was 1 in Houston, Texas, and there was 1 up at Columbia.
Wow. Okay.
And so, you got to work with them, but it really, and you can't compare those things to the cell phone. I mean, they could not simultaneously do anything while they maintained an image on a television. You could either or, and they could not run programs. You could not run a program during the day. You had to submit it, and it ran overnight. But okay, some of the areas of technology that's a real strength I have, is the ability to pick up these technologies. But we had major cases in things like how DVDs are made, how the information is organized on them.
Okay.
And how do you manage the fact that errors are going to creep into the reading of this information? How do you deal with that? I had to learn photochemistry. I had to learn biochemistry. I had a client who made thin membranes with pores in them that could open and close when an atom came along, and therefore was able to detect the presence of an individual biological atom. They were just so. I mean, at Kenyon we represented Xerox. I had to learn the xerography, all that stuff. There was, so I represented the man who invented the first ultrasound scanner for detecting blood clots in the carotid artery.
Wow.
He was so there were always these new areas of technology. The only area that I did not feel competent to pick up quickly was the nomenclature for organic chemistry.
Okay.
I mean, that would require, it's a different language. I mean, aspirin is something like ester of salicylic acid. And I have no idea what a salicylic acid is, so I could talk to people about that, but I couldn't imagine myself taking the deposition of a hostile chemist. He would turn me in knots.
Yeah, it's
But other than that, any area of technology.
So you just kept up with it. You didn't have like a subscription.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story. I wanted to learn about the internet.
Yeah.
I have a son who's a professor.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about your son who got you into technology.
So I went to him. He's a professor of computer science at Columbia. And I asked him to tell me about the internet. How does it work? So he said, look, rather than me trying to describe it to you, why don't you sit in on my course? I have a course up at Columbia, and I'll let you audit it.
Did he give you an A?
So I did that.
Yeah.
2 days a week, I would go up to Columbia and just sit there and take this stuff in. So he gives a homework assignment. You have to write a little program. That was the homework. And I got an 85. And I went to him and I said, my program worked. Why did I only get an 85? And he said, well, it worked, but you didn't do it the best way. So I said, if I had treated you like that, you wouldn't have passed toilet training. You know? So he said, you know what? You don't have to hand in homework. You don't have to take the exam. You don't have to bother me with that.
Yeah.
But so anyway, I sat in on his course, and we had a client who they had invented the phone card, all right, and now they were going into internet by the internet phone technology, and they were looking for a lawyer who knew about the internet, and that was me. I mean, I had just studied it for a year with in my son's course, and they hired me, and it was a very large litigation against basically the defendant was Skype and eBay, and they needed somebody to read the source code for the Skype system, which was guarded like a state secret. I mean, big fuss over that. So we hired an expert, a professor of computer science, recommended by my son.
Yeah.
And he and I went to, once a week, we would go to a law office in New Jersey. We would sit there all day reading the source code.
Wow.
For the Skype invention. So I was learning, I mean, it was just fun. At one point, you mentioned this business about books. At one point, I was offered $50 if there was a company that was selling technical books, and I was buying their books.
Okay.
And apparently, their marketing department wanted to interview people like me to find out why I was buying their books, and they offered me $50 if I would sit there for half an hour and answer their questions. And when I got there, there was a group of people, had been buying their books. And one of the first questions they asked is, why do you buy these books? I mean, what's the purpose of reading these books? And almost everybody said, well, we do it for enjoyment, for fun. And the guy says, you do this for fun? He just was astonished by that. It was always interesting to keep up with what was going on.
And the technical background obviously came in handy during your career. I mean, that's what you.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, you found obviously the way to weave it within the practice of law.
Yeah, it didn't have to be exactly the field that I had done work in, but I mean, physics gives you a very broad background.
Yeah. What so like what were the most interesting changes you've seen in patent law over your career?
Oh, well, that was tremendous. When I went into patent law for the reason I said, and there were these boutique firms, of which Kenyon & Kenyon was one. And in the early days, most patents were held invalid. It was very difficult to make money in patent litigation. So it was this strange backwater. And why was that? It all had to do with the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, every country was a mess except the United States. England, France, Germany, Japan, Russia. The only country that was making products was the United States. And we weren't interested in patents. We were interested in selling products all around the world. We did not want to be excluded on the basis of patents. So the law had developed in that way. Anybody had a patent, they had to worry that they would be considered an antitrust violator.
Right.
And along comes the Japanese in the early 80s, and they're killing us. They're making cars that are better than our cars. They invented the catalytic converter. And what can we do about that? So Congress says they're stealing our inventions, which wasn't really true. why don't we create a new court that will hear all the appeals and patent cases, called the Federal Circuit. It's down in Washington. All the cases will go into this court. And on that court, we will put judges who have the right attitude towards patents.
Okay.
Because before that, you would just go out to the general appellate courts.
Right.
The 9 or 10 appellate courts that existed. And those judges could have very different attitudes towards patents. So the justification that was given was it would eliminate venue shopping. But now they had a court where they could really emphasize patents, and the law did a complete flip-flop. Now there were preliminary injunctions. You could never get an injunction in a patent case. There were jury trials. No one ever tried a patent case to a jury.
Wow, jury trial. Okay.
Yeah, so from a lawyer's point of view, I mean, not worrying about whether it's best for the world as a whole, but from the lawyer's point of view, this was a very good idea because it simplified. You know, you didn't have conflicting laws from 10 different jurisdictions, and the court was actually very helpful and eventually had more technical competence than either the district courts or the previous appellate courts.
So was it like a federal law, like you could practice it in like any state, or you have to be barred in the, New York?
No, we could handle cases across the United States.
Okay.
Basically, what you had to do was petition the court to allow you to practice this one case.
Like pro hoc vice or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the judges were sympathetic to that because they wanted lawyers and they knew what was going on. And if you brought the case in Selma, Alabama, they didn't have anybody. So they were happy to let you in. As long as you affiliated yourself with a local lawyer.
Right.
Who was responsible for you behaving.
Right.
Yeah, and you agreed that they could punish you.
Okay.
You gave them that control. So we practiced all over the country. I mean,
okay. Wow, it
was nice that way. But it was restricted to patent, trademark, copyright law. That was our practice anyway. We couldn't write a will for somebody in these places, but didn't want to anyway.
Yeah. Wow. So all right. Well, that's. Would you say it was like luck that you sort of came across this whole sort of intersection of physics and the law and science and the law? Or?
Today, I mean, look at intellectual property law. It's in the newspaper every day. It wasn't that way at all.
Right.
I mean, it was, like I said, it was a backwater. And when I first learned it, I said to myself, why isn't the patent office treated like an administrative agency? They never mention the fact that it's governed by the Administrative Procedure Act. Nobody would ever think of making that argument.
Right.
And they said, well, it presents its own complexities, and the courts are happy enough dealing with the complexities arising from the technical subject matter that they leave these other issues alone. I was even told at one point that don't worry about the rules of evidence. You introduce whatever you have to introduce so the judge can understand what's going on.
Yeah, because you had to educate. It was your job to educate the judge, really, right?
Well, in some cases, a lot of times you came before district court judges that had never had a patent case, or in many cases, but didn't want to ever have a patent case.
Right.
They just. I remember I had one case in Connecticut before a judge, and I was taking over the case from another lawyer who had asked for a jury trial, and I thought that was ridiculous. And the other side, he didn't want a jury trial either. So we went before this judge and we said, we'd like to get off your jury calendar and have you try the case without a jury. And he said, let me tell you something. He said, this is my third patent case. He said, in the first case, I said I could not understand the technology. Said it right in my opinion. I can't understand what these guys are talking about. I'm appointing a special master, and I will follow his recommendation.
Okay.
It came up to the Second Circuit, and they reversed me. They said, you can't do that. You have to make the effort to understand it. You can work with the special master, but you have to understand it.
Okay.
He said, in the second case, he said, this time I held the patent invalid, wrote an opinion, and the court reversed me again, saying that I didn't understand the technology, that I completely got it wrong. He said, this is my third case. And he said, we're trying it to a jury. So I said, Your Honor, I think if the parties don't want a jury, you have to give us a bench trial. And he said, all right, you make a motion for that. We'll try that motion. I'll be happy to litigate that with you up to the Court of Appeal. So we settled the case. There was no way this judge was going to try.
He was just trying to give it to the jury. I don't want it.
Yeah, he'd be happy to sit there and rule on admissibility of evidence and things like that.
Right.
He knew he wasn't going to understand the technology.
Wow. So
presenting jury trials in patent cases is very interesting because it's hopeless to try to teach the jury new technology. I mean, they can't ask you questions. You can't ask them questions. You can tell them what's going on, but you have no way of knowing whether they got it or don't have it. And
yeah, it's difficult. Yeah.
And it's just so the juries are smart. So what they do is they look for issues that they can understand.
Right.
But you have to present your case that way. So a lot of patent cases are about the struggle the inventor went through to come up with his invention, or how the infringer was cheating him in some way. Maybe he was an ex-employee who stole the technology. So you get a lot of cases like that.
Yeah, yeah.
To teach people, how you sample sound and digitize it.
Right.
They can hear those words, but it's very difficult to get them to really understand what that means. Just that simple thing I said to you. What does it mean to sample a sound, and what does it mean to digitize it? And you can spend an hour trying to explain that. And they may even understand it as they hear it, but they won't retain it in a way that they can really implement. Unless you're lucky and you get somebody on the jury who has a good technical background, and then you're arguing to one person.
Yeah.
You don't know who that person is yet, but that's what you're doing.
Did you ever think of being a judge, like being on the bench? Were you ever?
No. I thought that litigation was interesting from the point of view of an advocate.
Okay.
But it must be deadening from the point of view of the judge. You just have to. It's sort of. I remember we had a case before one judge, and it was going to take a few days to cross-examine an expert witness. And my partner, it was Mike Rackman, he said to the judge, "Am I taking too long?" And the judge said, "It's a life sentence."
Yeah.
I'm not doing your case, I'm doing the case.
Yeah.
Take as long as you need.
Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah. No, I never, and also when I graduated from law school, I mean, I wasn't interested in clerking for a judge, really for financial reasons. I had just spent, 3 years in glorious poverty, but it was time to start supporting my family.
Yeah.
The reason I was able, I should say this, my wife would appreciate this. The reason I was able to afford law school is I sent my wife to work.
Okay.
I mean, I was making the salary of an adjunct professor, which was not great.
Yeah.
And she got a job as a researcher at the Tufts Medical Center in Boston.
Wow.
So, and we split the responsibilities. The kid, I'd drop him off, she'd pick him up, things like that.
Yeah.
One of the things we had to do was find a school for my child who was, just preschool that would keep him all day, and there was no such school. But we found out that there was an afternoon school run by the Lubavitch Hasidim, and they would take any Jewish kid they could get their hands
Really?
on. And so he would go from one school to the other school.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of funny incidents because we weren't that observant.
Yeah.
Emily, and now we were dealing with a kid who was asking us questions about something he had learned in the Lubavitch school. But he was only like 3 or 4 years old, so
It's a head start. Yeah.
It wasn't a serious problem. But
Mr. Rubenstein, like, Dr. Rubenstein, did we leave anything out today that you wanted to bring up regarding, your career or your firm? I don't know if we left anything out.
well, let's talk about the firm more than I have so far. I mean, the practice is a patent, trademark, copyright.
Yep.
The people there are of great ability, other than me, some of whom I helped hire. So they it's you got very enthusiastic people who like each other, and one of the things I was able to do was handle these litigations at relatively modest cost.
Right.
Again, maybe a tribute to my technical background, but I used to be able to move through the early discovery stages very quickly, because I could take the deposition of a say an engineer without having to spend a lot of preparatory time for that, and so that greatly reduced costs on things.
So you have a few different offices now, right? For you guys are in Manhattan.
Yeah, it's essentially the Manhattan office. The others are just satellite offices.
And you have and it's grown obviously since you've been there. You've been there a while, and you have many more attorneys than when you started off with 5, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's several of the attorneys became elderly and retired, but there's a constant feed of new blood into the firm.
That's good. That's good.
A lot of the work involves what I described as mostly litigation, which is what I did, but there's also a strong group that does patent prosecution, that is obtaining patents from the patent office, which is it's a different skill set, but it's really,
okay.
Yeah.
Understood. Well, it's very, very interesting stuff, especially, seeing how technology has changed over the course of your career, and all the things that I'm sure you've seen have been pretty interesting and dynamic, from computers like we talked about, and cell phones, even televisions. Since I was a kid, like, those televisions have changed greatly, into like it's hard to even work those things now.
I mean, it's so ridiculously fast. I mean, when I was a kid, we didn't have a telephone. People didn't have telephones.
Yeah.
And then my father had a grocery store, and so he got a telephone so that people who had phones could call in orders. And so then we got a phone because we could call my father. My mother could talk to my father. So then my aunt got a phone.
Yeah.
For my mother and so on, and it just proliferated very quickly.
Yeah.
But there's a time when
it's just how it blew up. Like, it was your dad's store, your house, then your aunt, and then it just went from there, right? Like, that was.
I remember, just to show how crazy things have advanced. We have a family down in Louisiana, a group settled down there, and when we would call them up, we wouldn't call from the house. We would go to a candy store.
Right.
There was a phone booth because we thought that, you wanted the operator to tell you 3 minutes are up. Otherwise, God knows what the phone bill would be.
Right.
So
then you had somebody outside knocking on the door to come into the phone booth because they were waiting their turn.
Yeah. So it just primitive compared to today's.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on growth with the firm and everything you've accomplished. It's amazing to
It was a fun. It's been a fun career. It really has.
yeah.
I mean, I'm glad I made the changes that I did. Well, I have friends who stayed in physics, and I probably would have been happy doing that also.
Yeah.
But certainly, what I did was reasonable to do.
So how can
I've given you the true story of why I made these changes. When I would apply for jobs, I would be asked, "Well, why are you switching from physics to law?" And if I started to tell the story, the interviewer would look very bored. So I learned to say, which was not true, I learned to say I did it for the money, and they say, "Oh, fine, that makes perfect sense to."
They want to hear that, huh? That's weird.
Yeah, that was it. We were done with that subject in one sentence. We could get down to more serious things.
Wow. All right. Well, so what's your email address? Like, if anybody's listening out here wants to shoot you an email or contact you.
A. Rubenstein.
Yep.
ARUBENSTEIN @GRR, which is the initials of Gottlieb Rackman Reisman, GRR.com. So okay. arubenstein@grr.com.
All right, and you could see Mr. Rubenstein's, Dr. Rubenstein, lawyer story that was posted today. As of the recording, is January 26th on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram is @lawyer_stories. And it's been a great pleasure to have you on the episode today, episode 33, our Larry Bird episode. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
I'm just going to, so wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourselves, everybody.
The Lawyer Stories podcast is produced by Marketing the Law. Are you looking at your social presence every day? Potential clients are. Learn how to magnetize your brand with the help of Marketing the Law. Find us on Instagram @Marketing the Law to learn more.